All right. Hi, everybody. Today's webinar is time tracking for agencies by Upsourced. Upsourced is a team of 25 that provides CFO and accounting services to 100 plus agencies. Our speakers today are both senior controllers on the team, Meredith Pickrell and Sean Donahue. Let's get things started.
Awesome. Thanks, Caroline. I'm Meredith. Super excited to be here with you guys today. As we're going through, I don't want it to be super talk at you. So if you guys have questions that come up, drop them in the Slack and Caroline will help us moderate those. I've been with Upsourced for about 4 years now. I work with digital and creative agencies every day, with sizes anywhere from 5 employees to north of 50 employees. And so we have a lot of experience with time tracking and a lot of opinions that we're going to talk through today.
And I'm Sean Donahue, also senior controller at Upsourced. Been here almost 6.5 years now. Same context as Meredith. Worked with a lot of creative agencies, seen a lot of processes implemented, and seen time tracking be pretty instrumental in a lot of those. So we both are fairly passionate about it and excited to talk about it today. So throughout today, 3 kind of big takeaways or agenda items. 4 reasons that we think are the pillars of why we should time track and what the outcomes will be. How do we get our team to get bought into it, and how do we actually roll it out? And then if we are bought in and we do want to roll it out, what are some tools that Upsourced has seen that has worked? And so we'll just quickly highlight those, and probably assuming this agenda will be 25 minutes or so, and then plenty of time for questions and whatnot afterwards, like Meredith was saying. So first question, Meredith, I'm a creative agency. Why should I time track?
Yeah. So there, like we kind of said, 4 main reasons to start with the why here. The first one is capacity planning. So understanding how much capacity on the team. Are we overstaffed, understaffed? Do we need to bring in more work? Are people working over 40 hours a week, and it's gonna lead to burnout? So we need to hire in specific roles to kind of free up that capacity. So that's the number one. We want to make sure that we have that, we're going to talk a lot about work-life balance. We want to make sure we have that proper balance on the team. And so understanding where, people's time is going. And for a service-based business, your biggest cost is people cost, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the entire piece that's driving revenue. So understanding where that time is being spent is helping us understand, where that revenue is going.
Yeah, I feel so many times we're meeting with owners or operations managers, and man, we're running around with our heads cut off. We can't get a second to breathe. This is crazy. And, the only way to quantify that and to get our way out of this is to time track, right? We need to understand what are the inefficiencies that are getting us to where we are. And there's only kind of one really good way of quantifying that, and it's with time.
Yeah. And something we'll talk about a little bit later is understanding. So we're going to give you some recommended tools or what we see best practices, but along with time tracking, we suggest some way to that integrates a forecasting planner as well. So you can see okay, here's the historical data. This is how long it's taking. What does our future look like? And what are our gaps? And this is useful from anywhere from a small agency to a large agency. I've got a client right now, pretty big, and we see we can, go and look at where the design team's time is going. And I've got 2 designers that are over hours every month. And we've been able to have conversations about how we can shift some of that time around to the rest of the team to kind of even it out.
Right. There's multiple people working on projects and multiple departments, sometimes teams. We need to know how to build projects, right? And if we have new projects coming in, how are we going to staff that? Is it a 2-to-1 developer to design? That information is really important for capacity planning.
Yep. Cool.
So that's our first kind of takeaway. So Mary, you want to talk us through the second one?
Yeah. So the second one is to gain efficiency. One of my favorite anecdotes, and if you are one of my clients, you've probably heard this spiel before, but I'd worked with a client for many years, and we were looking through their time tracking data, and this one particular guy, he was working over 200 hours a month every single month, and that's more than a 40-hour work week. He had some pretty heavy hours, and the 4th or 5th month in a row, it's what's going on here? And they were we dug into it and it was like, oh, this guy's rendering files. And it's just taking a long time. So it was like, great, let's buy him a $5,000 computer. Like, let's get him the best computer we can get it and like throw money at this problem. And it switched, and he was able to bring those hours down because we were able to throw like a piece of hardware at the problem. The same with this example on the screen, like another client, they bought some iPads for their designers, and the designers were able to like design more efficiently by like being able to write it out or draw it out on the iPad versus like, on the computer. So really, like, are there softwares, are there hardwares, or are there processes that we can put into place to help gain efficiencies? And we were able to glean this data out of time tracking. And so it just really starts the conversation. Obviously, like there's a margin of error in time tracking data, but it's just a point to like start the conversation of like, oh, is there some type of software we can implement as a team and it would help X problem?
Right. And we're talking like right now, we're only discussing like strictly financial benefits, right? We'll get into the more non-financial, but what you're talking about is, yeah, I mean, $5,000 is a month of a $5,000 or $50,000 employee, right? That's the cost side of it is nothing in terms of hiring an employee. And then that's not even to mention the opportunity cost. So that's just like what I'm paying somebody, but we're not even talking about the fact that, you know, somebody, a third of somebody's capacity could be 40 billable hours times $200 an hour. That's a lot of time. So it's not only just the cost, it's a lot of money we're leaving on the table.
Yeah. Yep. Agreed. Cool. Let's go on to the fourth why. So the fourth why, I know Sean is very passionate about this, and that is project profitability.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So we do have, third and fourth whys are project profitability and project pricing. So we have two slides for them. They're kind of the same in terms of what we're trying to get to. But project profitability, this is what I'm passionate about because a lot of our clients have different revenue streams. We have different types of projects, and knowing which of those to market towards and which of those to put our efforts towards acquiring is really important. And the only way of knowing that, again, would be hours for project profitability. So all of our costs as service agencies are people, and we really should know, obviously, what our biggest costs are doing. And time tracking is the way of getting that. The other side of it too is that we want to be fair to our employees on the profitability side. Like if we have a department that's constantly saying that they're overworked, is that their fault or not? Right? Like, if we think our employees are pretty efficient, then it's probably like a problem with that type of service offering that we're having. We probably need to fix that into the scoping side of things, right? So it's not always a client service issue or a service team issue. Sometimes it's scoping or it's pricing.
Yeah. And the thing I would say with project profitability, and we talk, a lot about our gross margin at the financial level of like, okay, what's our target gross margin? If it's good, great, move on. But if it's not good, then we have to go that layer deeper and to understand, okay, if we've got a leak or a few leaks, we have to identify where those leaks are at. And so to go that layer deeper, you have to go into the project profitability to understand, are there certain types of projects that we're better at and more efficient at? Are there projects that we love doing this type of work? They're passion projects, but we're losing a ton of money. Like, can we get that more to break even? And so to start with okay, here's our gross margin. Here's what the target should be. And if we're not meeting that target, let's start to identify where the leaks are at. Exactly.
Which leads us to our fourth, which would be the pricing, right? So the project pricing is how we get to that profitability. The thing we often see is we write off hours, right? So say we have a project and we bill them hourly for it. When it's all said and done, we decide what to bill end of the month. We end up writing off a couple hours because we didn't feel that we maybe provided the best service for all those hours or what it may be, but we don't ever aggregate that information. And it turns out, when you aggregate all that, if we only bill 2/3 of those hours that we expected, we need to really fix that into our margins. And when we're doing this, we're probably not. And so having that information is really valuable. Again, service offering A versus B. Is one, are we going to constantly be more efficient in one? We should probably target that in our sales so that we can make that higher margin.
Yeah. And I always say, like, I present this data a lot to our clients. Like, I go to their team, or I'll go on site even and like present this data to the team to like start with the why, with get like that buy-in. So part of this is like when you're time tracking, we're looking at, when we're scoping work in the future, you're like hurting your future self by not accurately tracking your time here. And so it's really important for the team to understand that, so we get buy-in from the team, so then we are able to properly scope the work in the future.
Yeah, even a good example would be at Upsource. We through time tracking, we learned there's a couple service offerings that we offer that is hard to fixed fee scope. And so we thought we always could. And then we just went down rabbit holes, or I wouldn't even fair to say that. It's more cumbersome. It's just, you really have to intimately understand and like dig in, and you don't want to discount that. Right. And so like we learned through time tracking, hey, we shouldn't fixed fee scope these things. There's a couple of things that we need to do time and materials, because it's only fair to the client and it's only fair to us. And without the time tracking, we would probably be still upside down in one or two revenue streams. And the team working on that project would probably be a little less happy, because they're kind of being told, hey, speed things up. And now I'm working a little bit more and I'm more stressed. So really helps.
Yeah, agreed.
So the biggest, Mayor, for the next thing, the kind of the dark cloud over all of this, which is the stigma that's over time tracking, right? Time tracking is kind of looked at not positively. Sometimes it's looked at as somebody trying to babysit you, let's say. So tell me, if I am somebody that wants to adopt time tracking, how do I get my team on board?
Yeah, it's definitely like the thing that no one wants to do it. No one enjoys it. So if we can all remember that we're like coming at it from that place.
Yeah, it's not fun.
And it's definitely like a cultural thing. It's a tone at the top. So I think that the number one, there's a lot of podcasts on this. There are a lot of books. There's all kinds of resources and information that you can get. And they have lots of different, there's carrot, there's a stick. You can incentivize people, you can punish people. Ultimately, from what I've seen, it's honestly how leadership views this. If this is important to leadership and you set the tone at the top that like, culturally, we want work-life balance. Like, we want to pay everyone well. We want to promote people. The only way we're able to do that is if we can get this information, understand our margins, and grow the company. And if you're transparent about that and like start with the why, like we started with the why today. When you take this to your team, start with the why to your team. Have them understand, like, we aren't doing this to like big brother's watching you to slap you on the wrist, or like, it's not to like understand how many coffee breaks you're taking today. No, it's the reasons that we just talked about. It's all for, and most of the owners that we work with, they're not trying to like, get richer and make all of their employees work more. Like, it's very much like a team. It's a balance. It's like, we want to work together. We want to grow. And so it's just data. And this data helps us make decisions and helps us drive the business in the right direction. And so if you can come at it from that angle with your employees, that shift happens and that culture happens. But I have seen like a lot of the books and podcasts out there, they're like, incentivize people with Amazon gift cards and this and that. I haven't really seen that work. What works is being transparent with the team, pulling them into these conversations, understanding, like, do a portfolio review, look at what your project margins are on a monthly basis and have a conversation. Like, are we seeing our margins go down? Okay, let's dive into this. The PMs can probably give some input on like what's going on. Maybe there is some sort of process that's broken that needs to be updated that could help.
Yep. One thing I always try to think of it as we're trying to actually help the employees. I know it doesn't come off that way, but I don't want to hold somebody accountable to a target that's not fair, right? And so if I'm trying to hit a billable rate on a project, let's say, and it's constantly below, and so I'm telling a PM like, hey, we need to get this rate up, or we need to increase whatever. It's not fair to them if it's actually an unachievable rate, or this revenue stream they're working on, or the service offering. It's just more cumbersome than web dev, let's say. And there's no way that I'm going to be able to bill all the hours if the hours are based on check mark or, like milestones, and we can't hit those milestones consistently. So it's all about like getting alignment with your team. And I think that if you kind of, again, look at it from that point of view, because it also does take, if we have like capacity issues and we need to implement, say some change in scoping or pricing or the makeup of a project, we're looking at a few months before we can really implement something, right? Because we need the time tracking data, and then we need the new projects to come in that have the new, because we probably have signed contracts. So it's a couple of month lag probably. And so one thing that we do see, which is not the best, is, I'm too busy to time track right now. It's just, there's too much going on. And while I am empathetic with that, I do understand that it's just another thing that you probably don't want to do when you're busy, but it is also the best route out of it, right? It's the best route out of it is to make sure that our margins are good and that our pricing is reasonable and that we can hire ahead. And the only way that we can hire ahead and get the service team extra capacity is if our margin and gross margin is able to support that. So there's enough money to pay everybody. Yep. To hire ahead requires a strong gross margin. And a strong gross margin is oftentimes dictated by billing rates and hours.
Yeah, totally.
It's a hard message though for the team. I mean, I'm empathetic to that because it's especially when you've never done it, just the culture side of it can sound bad. And I don't know, Mary, I've found actually helpful that sometimes we've come in and talked with the teams, and just being part of the strategy. And so if you're working with us currently, we're always happy to do that. I do think it can help in terms of like just being able to field questions, if we have Q&A. And so anything that you need help support from us, we're always happy to do so.
Yeah, totally agree. I think the biggest thing is buy-in from your leadership, and then explain to the team the why behind it and being as transparent as possible. Yep. And that's how you adjust for those culture. Like that's how you fight off the cultural backlash of it.
Mm-hmm. True. We've seen a couple of clients too. We've found that, PM number one has a stronger skill set than something as PM number two. And after the data showed that, it was like, oh, wow, well, we should give this person more projects, that are dev based. And it really helped all margins. Everybody worked a little bit less and we actually made a little bit more. And so again, it's like, it really is a goal to enroll everybody and have the data help us make decisions that allow for growth. Messaging, it can be tricky, but it can be done.
Totally agree.
So who should track their time?
Yes, everyone. Short answer.
Okay.
I know that this is hard because getting people to actually do it and do it accurately is the hardest thing I see from our clients. Like management's bought in. Okay. Like let's get the team to do it. All right. Well, sometimes most of the team is really good about it. There's a few people that aren't so good about it. So then you get inaccurate data. And so then everything that we just talked about isn't as helpful because when you have inaccurate data, you're not getting the right outputs. And so some best practices that I like to suggest especially when I'm talking to our clients' teams are track in 15-minute increments. So track your time in 15-minute increments. If you're using something like Harvest or Teamwork that has a timer feature, encourage the team to use the timer feature. So you go in, you start working on a project, you click the timer, it starts spinning, you go to the next project, starts spinning. That's going to be accurate time tracking. And then the third piece is have a minimum of an 8-hour day. So whether not all of that 8 hours is going to be billable, but what it does is allow the reviewer that's going through to see like, oh, did this person track time correctly? They can see, oh, quick look, they tracked at least 40 hours. I'm good to move on to the next person to catch. So trying to catch people that miss their time because you want to make sure all of those billable hours are in. So these are just like best practices.
Mm-hmm. I have a question for you, Mayor. If I'm working on a project and let's say it's fixed fee, and I know it's going over budget, but I feel like it should be better. So I'm just going to track some time to internal rather than the project because it's not really fair to the project. Does that make sense?
I get that question a lot.
Okay.
So often like the employees feel like, oh, like I just want this to be like the best work, or I'm feeling guilty because it feels like we're a law firm billing all of our hours, and I don't want to make this, client mad at me, or the PM's breathing down my neck about our budget, and so I know I can't put any more time into this, but I really need this code to look a certain way, or I want this design to look a certain way. Track the time to the client. It all has to go to, if you're working on a client, it goes to the client time, because what that does is, and we can answer questions about utilization rates and utilization targets, but what that does is if you don't track all of your billable work to the client, it's just going to artificially skew your individual utilization rate, and it looks lower than what you actually did. And so it's like, oh, hey, Sean can take on more work because he was only 40% utilized. But in reality, Sean was 80% utilized, but he just, put all of those billable time to internal because he was afraid of making the client mad.
Right. And to layer on that, sometimes there's a lot of people doing that, right? So there's 4 different people in let's say, I know I'm dogging on the web dev team, but let's say that 4 people on that team are doing that exact thing, right? Project's supposed to be 20 hours. I'm putting 10 towards internal. I think I'm doing myself a favor, doing the team a favor. But in reality, if that's happening and we have a gross margin issue as a firm, it might be literally as simple as, hey, web dev projects are billed hourly now because all of these go way over budget on fixed fee. And it's not anybody's fault or anybody's, it's just they take more than we're scoping. So our gross margin issue could literally be as simple as switch from fixed fee to hourly for one revenue stream and everything's fixed. But if I'm putting that time internal, we never know.
Yeah, agreed. Okay, I think we hit on that one.
Yeah, so maybe we look at some tools. I would say back to Mary's point of how many hours, like 8 hours, like our rough thing. In the same context of everything about this is flexible, right? The goal is just to understand what our team is working on. It can be as granular and as great. And like we have some examples here. Harvest is like a pretty broad strokes, easy to use. Time tracking that does some forecasting. Teamwork is like more aligns with project management and helps set up teams, helps with some capacity, but is really great at task management. Float's another one that does forward looking a little better. I think the big takeaway is you can craft anything to really get you what you want. You really just want to know what your employees are working on for the time that they're in the office, right? And so do you have any more feelings on that, Mare?
I just like, if you're just getting started with time tracking, I would say pick a software. Like Harvest is really basic and really simple, and like lots of our clients use it. Just pick a software. You could even do it. A lot of our clients, when they first started with us, they were doing it in an Excel sheet. It's not the easiest, a Google sheet. It's not the easiest way, but it's pretty cheap to do, a Google sheet. Start simple and just like get in the habit of, it's like exercising, like, just small incremental, like repetition and getting the exercise, the rep in. You're going to build stronger. And like, especially when you're in that, the 5-person, like $1 million revenue stage, like this is the perfect time to start it, because you can start, building those really good foundations.
Agreed. And one other thought I had about like getting the team enrolled is sometimes an employee would have to be a squeaky wheel, right? To say that, hey, I need help with these projects or with X, Y, and Z. Time tracking and having timers running is just an opportunity for project managers and managers in general to see what the team's struggling with and reach out and help. So again, not to audit them, but to support them, right? If I know Mayor's been working on this one project 20 hours this week, I'm not going to say, hey, stop working on that project. I'm going to say, hey, what's going on? Like, you're a good worker. I know you wouldn't be doing this for fun. Let me help you, right? And so just that's worth thinking about as another way of messaging it to your team.
Yep. Totally agreed. One final thought I kind of want to circle back to, I don't think we hit as much, but when you are, like growing and a bigger team, like I'm thinking like 20 to 30 people, it's helpful to have a dedicated person be the reviewer of timesheets. So that person is looking, did my people get their time in? Did they charge anything, like a quick scan? Oh, I think they charged something to internal that probably goes to a client. You can tell that by like the description or, a task name. And just having someone that like gut checks that before you analyze the data, because when you it gets to us, we're analyzing this data and we're like, oh, well, PM number one accidentally charged a significant portion of time to internal, and that's not real. So once you hit that threshold, like somewhere between 20 and 30, like somewhere around there, you want to dedicate a person that will review those timesheets.
Yeah, and probably at that point, you'll probably have some sort of operations manager or some sort of, it's usually that person, right? It's the person that has a good idea of who's working on what, because they have the best ability to just high level gut check things. But totally agreed. Totally agreed.
And then the other thing that we can hit on, I guess I want to open it up for Q&A for the audience. And depending on if you guys already have time tracking implemented, we can talk about like utilization targets and what those would look like how to actually look at this data once you've started it. Or if you're just thinking about getting it started, we can answer questions and go that direction. So kind of opening up the floor. Caroline, any Q&A that has come in so far that you think we should hit on?
Yeah, so one was back when you guys were talking about your time tracking up to like 15 minutes. So at what point do you have people round up, or does it kind of like, because you're saying these 15-minute increments, but are you letting people round up, or like, do you want exact, or is it just kind of like, oh, it was 11 minutes, so 15 minutes is going build here?
So I think ideally we're working with a timer, right? Ideally, you just have your harvest or whatever it is. I'm working, like I came to this, I have webinar as a internal project. So I just click start. When it's done, I click stop. And then I click which project I'm starting on next. I think the 15 minutes is more of like, if I'm looking back and I forgot my timer, or, I forgot my timer for 3 hours and I need to estimate, we're saying just be pretty close to what you did. Don't try to get to the 4-minute block of time. Just think 15 minutes then. It's kind of when you forget or need to recap.
And like for me, when I'm like going through and I'm answering emails, like I try to like stack my day where I'm only answering emails in a certain like half-hour increment of my day and not like constantly in and out. That's what works for me. That's not what works for everyone. But what I do is like, okay, what client did I spend the most time in that 30-minute chunk? And I bill it to those two, because it like works out in the wash. We're not billing this stuff for time and materials. Be exact, like start that timer, be exact. If we're on a fixed fee retainer, it works out in the end, as long as we like can be, as the 80 for 20 is like what we like to say a lot around here, and like be the most accurate as you can be. It's not going to be perfect.
Agreed. And I think one thing worth mentioning of that is don't let something small like that, because that is a small kind of hiccup, be the deterrent for rolling out time tracking across your whole team. There might be somebody on your team that really is working on 70 clients, let's say in a day. If that's a real thing, that might be hard. And sure, we can figure out a way to build in utilization targets and whatnot to incorporate that. But let's not let like one person's difficulty impact the fact that everybody else could do it pretty well still. And we find that with other things too, right? We have one role that might be difficult for whatever reason. Like, let's talk through that. But again, if we're working on projects, we probably want to track the time. And we don't want a small hiccup or an issue about if lunch goes to internal or PTO, some small, like that shouldn't be the deterrent for time tracking as a whole.
Yep.
Then another question we have is, how do you know when a project is too far gone? Like you're spending too much time on it, that it's, affecting your project margins or your net loss? Like what are your opinions there?
My first opinion is, what is the opportunity cost? So a lot of it depends on like, is there a backfill of projects that are just being delayed because of this? Then now we have a money left on the table issue, in addition to like, we're just losing money on the project. I think it also depends on how we're billing it. Is it a thing we're billing per hour that we're writing off more hours than we expected? Then I think we just need to get realignment with the client. If it's fixed fee, yeah, please.
On that, so Sean and I do this like at Upsource, right? Like Sean and I are looking and our peers are looking every single month and we're saying, okay, how many hours went into this particular client? How much are we charging them? What is our margin on it? And we're looking at that so frequently that we're able to we're able to go back to the team. Oh, is there some sort of process that we can make this more efficient? Or do we need to go back to the client and say, hey, we've got a scope creep here. When we originally proposed this, we didn't think of take X, it's now taking Y. We need to raise this fee. And so like, I think you all, when we're looking, like you need to not wait until the project is ending. You need to look at it and say, okay, what percentage of completion are we at? How many hours have we burnt through on this retainer? And then make an assessment. Have we gone over on scope? It's way easier to go back to your client and say, hey client, this isn't in the scope of work. We're happy to do it, but it's going to cost X in the middle of the project than it is at the end once you've handed them the final deliverable and you're like, oh, you owe me $20,000. And they're like, I didn't agree to that.
Right. And I will say over servicing can be it can be dangerous too. The longer you do it, the harder it's going to be to set the record straight and, get things back. So the sooner you do time tracking, the sooner you can have that conversation. Yeah. So it kind of does to answer directly. It kind of depends on how we're billing. It depends on what the opportunity cost or the money left on the table is. And it depends on if it's an internal problem with our efficiencies or if it's a problem with the scoping or the client staying within scope.
Yep. Agreed.
But knowing before it's over is very important. I agree with that.
Yeah. And if you're, again, looking at this data, once a month, I think everyone should be, even if it's looking at this project data and comparing it, how far along are we in the project? How much time have we spent? If it's retainers, a little bit easier to look at, etc.
Yep.
Same Great. Time you're looking at the team's utilization, look at your project margins.
And if we're billing something hourly and we're sometimes writing hours off, we want to look at that very regularly as well, at least once a month. Like we need to know what that realization rate, we'll call it. We need to know what that number is for sure.
Cool.
All right. I think that's all of our questions. If you guys have more, please feel free to email us. I will drop my email in the chat right now, and you can feel free to filter some questions over. We'll also email you guys a recording of the webinar. We thank you guys for attending.
Awesome.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.